Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to just give a really quick introduction of myself so that everyone listening knows who I am. My name is Maggie Hubbell, and I am the COO and co-founder of Shift. We are a female-founded technology company, and we give nurses training they deserve and the tools to improve patient outcomes, primarily through the use of virtual reality. Today, we're going to be talking about how technology is transforming the future of care delivery and innovation in healthcare in general. Nardo Manaloto is the CEO of Catalaize and the managing partner of Qubits Ventures. You have a lot of very interesting experience around innovation and technology, and I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do and the perspective that you bring to the conversation.
Thanks, Maggie. Thanks for having me here. So Nardo Manaloto, CEO of Catalaize, managing partner of Qubits Ventures. So my background is I'm a computer scientist by trade, 25 years in the deep tech and health tech industries, former head of technology innovation for Kaiser Permanente. Did that for about 7 years. And then coming out of that, I formed Catalaize, which is an innovation ecosystem dedicated to bringing together investors, healthcare tech companies with emerging technologies, and corporations. So I still have that as a company supporting my existing venture right now called Qubits Ventures, in which I'm a managing partner in. So Qubits Ventures is a pre-seed quantum tech fund. And the whole premise of it is to invest in early stage quantum tech startups. And hopefully a lot of these quantum tech startups will have a big intersection in healthcare, pharma, and life sciences as well.
Wow. So quantum is a fancy word. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the companies and projects that you're working on right now that are interesting and obviously that you'd see will have an impact on the future of healthcare and care delivery.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think definitely in the quantum space, one area that quantum is really good at is what we call quantum simulation and quantum optimization. So what that means is, so quantum in itself, it's a new kind of computing capability that is exponential in nature. And, as you know, classical computing, the way we compute is basically using ones and zeros, or what we call bits. With quantum computing, it uses atoms or small particles like atoms, photons, and small particles like that as computing bits. So it has an exponential aspect of compute. And this level of exponentiality is actually really good for healthcare and pharma. Let me give you a couple of use cases, right? So one use case is think about modeling drug, right? So in terms of our drug development right now, it's actually quite slow. Or anything that we do that has to do with life sciences in terms of gene modeling, personalization, anything that has to do with modeling molecules, for example, it's a slow process. So a typical pharma company would take 10 years to develop a drug because a big part of it is modeling out these different types of molecules, right? Protein folding and things like that. With quantum computing, you can actually simulate all of that in much lesser time. Existing quantum technologies from a simulation standpoint can do simulation in less than 4 months. So think of having a new drug coming out to you in a year. So just because of quantum. So that is definitely a big benefit in society, right? And another one for healthcare is in the area of imaging. So quantum is actually good with looking at imaging because it can also look into lights, right? Light sources. So we call that quantum photonics. So think of your existing MRI or X-ray. That is 1,000 times better in terms of clarity, right? So if you look at it from a healthcare standpoint, wow, you could probably determine early stage onset of any kind of disease just because of that level of clarity in the medical image. So that's another kind of innovation there. And then, one last example would be something like a quantum sensor. So think of a quantum sensor that can sense internal cell vibrations, right? So think of something like that. Right now, we don't have technology that can do that except for something that is quantum, because quantum is using small particles in which humans are built as well, right? So we're built out of atoms and the same kind of particles that the quantum sensors are dealing with. So those are just a few of the innovation there.
Those are all amazing examples. I mean, especially that first one, of course, we are thinking, wow, well, we're in a pandemic and we need need drugs now. Like those capabilities are really, really powerful and important. How do you get those changes made? How do you implement those things into the system so they're accessed by people who deliver care and patients who receive care?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it from a maturity level standpoint, right? So the different industries have different maturity level when it comes to technology adoption. That's one. I think the other component to it is the readiness of the technology itself, right? So the adoption life cycle for something this innovative that does take a while because especially in areas of quantum and new things happening there, a lot of it is definitely research. There's a lot more happening in the quantum software and hardware and application side nowadays. So it's been happening for the last 5 years, I would say, in terms of traction. But healthcare has always been a little slower in adoption. However, with quantum, I think what we're going to find is healthcare and pharma and life sciences and biotechnology and anyone in the chemistry side of things would be one of the earlier adopters, mainly because the time it takes to make something happen is much faster. Healthcare being a little bit more slower to adopt and regulatory and compliance type scenarios and all of the clinical stuff that we need to go through, it does become a barrier. So, I always say this, it's never about the technology. It's always about the people cooperation, Maggie. If we can get all of our stakeholders to cooperate and align in a way that we can move fast, then I think, technology adoption is not an issue. But, that's not the reality.
Before we started this conversation, we had another conversation about how sometimes, maybe you do upset people to try to get change made, but eventually it can work out. So we have a lot of people that we talk to and that listen to our videos and calls, and they want to make change big and small, right? Like we need to be making progress. Do you have advice on how to get things done, how to make changes?
Yeah, I do. So I think one of the areas that I think a lot of healthcare tech startups tend to forget is, when you look at healthcare, healthcare is already very complex, right? So there's a lot of applications and systems and processes that all of our stakeholders have to go through. And if you think of them, right, and from a user point of view and say, hey, you know what, I have this innovative technology that I want to bring in here. If you start bringing something in, but never start taking out stuff, then you just add it to their work, right? So when you add to their work, they're definitely not going to be happy about it because now it's more new things to do. And then, you're potentially can get into, union issues. Union will basically say, oh, you know what, you're adding more work to our nurses. So we have to renegotiate. So that is, one of those impacts. So what I would suggest is, for startups to actually look at, if I'm putting something in, what can I identify within the healthcare system to remove out? So I'm also part of the process of the simplification aspect. If you're able to do that, then first of all, you would change the user experience. The patient experience, you would change the clinician experience, and then you would also basically create a budget for your innovation because you're no longer managing all these other legacy systems. So I think if startups, if you want to make a change, you have to make sure you're able to displace the existing stuff that you want to improve, right? So I think startups don't really talk that way. They talk about, hey, let me bring in something, let me put in a pilot without necessarily looking at it from a user stakeholder point of view.
Right. Let's do something new and then less of something old.
Yes. Or let's just pile it on. And basically now I have, 20 different things of similar kinds that I need to deal with.
How do you cut through some of the noise though? So, like I said, we talk to people all the time that want to make big changes or even small ones, and they have to convince somebody that actually now is a good time, that this can't wait. And yet there's all this chaos going on. I mean, especially, the ebbs and flows of the pandemic make it even harder.
Yeah, I think you have to look at what they care about, right? So, I think it's all about experience. It's all about care quality, right? Right, care quality. It's all about cost. It's all about speed and all of that stuff, right? So, I think if you can, gather data that basically addresses all of that stuff, some of the stuff that we have issues with in innovation is there's a lot of innovation that doesn't have these types of data validation metrics that says, okay, you're actually making a good, you have data to show good outcomes. You have data to show you're impacting this process. You did some sort of a process analysis and you're decreasing the process by 68%, for example, right? You're saving time by removing 5 similar systems that you displaced, right? So, and how much time is that? Because time is gold for in the healthcare scenario. So I think those are the kind of things that you need to have in order to convince a lot of folks. If you don't have that, and all you're basically saying is, "Oh, I have these soft tangibles that I'm I'm giving to you," it'll be a hard sell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I did also, I know that you have a little bit of experience with some virtual reality and augmented reality, and I was wondering what your perspective is on VR and AR in healthcare and how the future will look different than what it is now.
Well, basically, I like AR and VR, right? So I think there's definitely a lot of uses for it. One is definitely the traditional uses for VR, training and education, simulation. I think it's also been shown in pain management, mental health and wellness. So those are the different, kind of like the typical stuff. The areas that I'd like to actually see more in the VR space would be in the areas of simulation. So I think you can use AR, VR for a lot more simulation, surgical planning. I think that there's already use cases for that. Also, use of VR for digital assessment and digital therapeutics, right? So I think that is also a growing area. VR-enabled telehealth would be really good. And then one that, in the past, I've done some work in doing virtual avatars, virtual doctors and things like that. So if I expand that to what we call the metaverse right now, metaverse, right? That's happening. You could actually create a metaverse that is a digital hospital with digital avatars. You're all living within your VR space, right? So and not just digital avatars, it's also a combination of that telehealth aspect. So you could portal into these digital type of hospitals and clinics and actually do your entire care within a VR perspective.
What we love about working with virtual reality is that the possibilities are endless, which is actually also sometimes our problem because we need to focus. And there are so many things that we could do. But what we're hearing right now, in addition to the work that we're doing around training for technical and soft skills for nurses, is a lot around using it as a tool for self-care, especially during this stressful times. And that's for nurses, caregivers, but also for patients. It's been really cool to see how quickly people are accepting this technology as normal. Whereas a year and a half ago, it was like, I don't know, that I think that's awesome. And it might be a while before we get there, but we're there now.
Yeah. And I think, the adoption of VR by big companies like Facebook and, Microsoft and all of that stuff, it's definitely helping this industry out, right? So the creation of Metaverse definitely is helping that out. Microsoft, I don't know if you saw the recent announcement, recently acquired Blizzard, right? So which is a gaming company. So well, guess what? they're probably going to use that technology to get into the metaverse type of scenario as well, right? So the writing is on the wall. And so I do like the self-care aspect. Some of the things that I also like with VR are things like, one particular problem that patients usually have, and even their caregivers, are in the area of figuring out medical devices, the use of devices, and actually getting them trained on that stuff. So I think a VR type scenario would actually be a great tool for that. So if you consider that as part of training and education, for clinician, caregivers, and patients and their family, I think those are all great use cases.
Absolutely. We've been approached many times around the training of medical devices because it's so scalable. And also, people just aren't traveling as much to go do those kinds of things in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing that I could tell you, in terms of from a pharma perspective, I think they have a hard time trying to get that right. From a pharma medical device standpoint, training, not just the medical devices themselves, but even training related to their drugs in terms of how to take it, training about wound care and things like that are also useful.
Right. Are you seeing any other trends or interesting things happening in the industry right now that you want to touch on before we end the conversation today?
Yeah, I think one trend is, the biggest trend is, from an underlying perspective, what you're going to see in these types of, in VR scenario, the VR will get smarter, right? So AI is already being introduced in the VR space. Now you're getting into the metaverse space. And then guess what? Quantum is here, right? So if quantum is here, guess what's going to happen? It's a natural for quantum and AI to get pieced together. And think about your VR that is quantum and AI enabled. So what can you do with that, right? I think to me that, that is definitely a good question to ponder upon.
The possibilities are endless. And I have a feeling that we're going to have a few more conversations about quantum.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a great space. And I'm actually looking forward, Maggie, in terms of where you guys go with this, right? Because, as you said, the possibilities are endless. I could see definitely bringing the smartness into your VR capability. I can see your capability being integrated in the metaverse, in the digital hospital standpoint. I can see definitely that. And then from that perspective, okay, how can quantum play with that, right? So It'll be interesting thinking for sure.
I mean, it's a crazy, fun, amazing time to be in tech. And it really is. I mean, the possibilities are only limited by our imaginations, I think. And then being able to seek out expertise from people like you will only help us get there. So thank you so much, Nardo. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you. And I look forward to seeing you in Santa Monica in March for our event on innovation in healthcare.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks for having me here. And I am looking forward to that event as well. So I'll keep in touch.